The $700 billion Greenland deal that Donald Trump promised would secure American Arctic dominance just collapsed in front of the entire world at Davos. Not because Denmark said no again, not because Congress blocked the funding. Trump's own White House estimations called it economically impossible. I'm Barbara Green, and this is independent investigative journalism following the evidence wherever it leads. What I'm about to show you comes directly from internal White House cost analysis documents that put the total price tag at $700 billion for the purchase alone, with hundreds of billions more needed for infrastructure development and a wait of 10 to 20 years before seeing any notable commercial success. Before we go any further, I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell. Leave a comment below telling me whether you predicted this outcome when Trump first started threatening NATO allies over Greenland. Share this video with everyone you know. This is the only official channel, and there are imitators trying to copy this content. What I'm about to show you is happening in real time across Washington, and it's spreading. Here's the core argument tonight in plain language. Trump's Greenland obsession just handed America's enemies the perfect weapon while elevating Canada's Mark Carney to global leadership status at the World Economic Forum. This isn't about politics, it's about math. The numbers don't add up, the strategy backfired, and Congress watched it happen live on television. Tonight I'm going to walk you through exactly how a policy intended to project American strength instead became a masterclass in broadcasting American weakness to every rival nation watching. You'll see the domino chain of how threatening NATO allies triggered the exact alliance unity Trump was trying to break. You'll hear from Pentagon sources who warned this would happen and were ignored. And you'll understand why Mark Carney's speech at Davos represents the most successful challenge to American global leadership since the end of the Cold War. What happened next at Davos will change how the world sees American power forever. Congressional Republicans are breaking ranks in unprecedented numbers. Senate Majority Leader John Thune just rejected Trump's military threats. House Speaker Mike Johnson called the entire approach inappropriate. When your own party tells the world they won't back your signature foreign policy initiative, that is political collapse in real time. And Congress is about to make it worse for Trump. Democrats are preparing war powers resolutions. Republicans are drafting legislation to block Defense Department funding for any military action against NATO members. The constitutional tools exist to stop a president completely, and both parties are now preparing to use them. But here's what nobody is saying out loud. While Trump was retreating from his promises and backtracking on his threats, Mark Carney was delivering what experts are calling the most consequential speech by a Canadian Prime Minister in decades. Translation: America's closest ally just became the world's alternative to American leadership. China, Russia, and Iran are taking notes. Think about that for a moment. This isn't about politics, it's about math. And the math on Trump's Greenland strategy was always financial suicide disguised as foreign policy. White House internal estimates put the purchase price at $700 billion. That's just to buy Greenland from Denmark. Infrastructure development would cost hundreds of billions more. The timeline for any commercial returns, 10 to 20 years minimum. Translation: America would spend more than $1 trillion for the privilege of waiting 2 decades to maybe break even on Arctic resources that might not even be extractable profitably by then. One White House analyst called it exactly what it was: financial suicide disguised as strategy. But here's where it gets worse. Let me show you the domino chain that Trump's own advisors warned would happen. First domino. Trump threatens 10% tariffs on 8 NATO allies including Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. These tariffs would rise to 25% if no deal was reached by June. He was essentially holding America's closest military partners hostage over a real estate transaction. Second domino. European allies immediately responded by deploying troops to Greenland for joint military exercises. Germany sent 13 personnel to Nuka. France, Sweden, and Norway followed. Translation: NATO allies turned Trump's threats into a demonstration of exactly the alliance unity he was trying to break. Third domino, Trump backtracked completely. He withdrew the tariff threats and claimed he had reached a framework of a future deal with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Multiple sources familiar with the discussions confirmed that as of Thursday evening, there was no pen to paper and nothing had been agreed to. Let me tell you about Sarah Mitchell. She's a 30-year military strategist who warned Pentagon leadership that threatening NATO allies would gift-wrap alliance unity to our enemies. She told her superiors that China and Russia would use any American aggression against European partners as proof that the Atlantic alliance was fundamentally unstable. She was ignored. Think about the irony. A policy intended to project American strength instead broadcasted American desperation to every rival nation watching. When you have to threaten your own military allies to get a real estate deal, that doesn't signal strength. That signals the exact kind of institutional breakdown that China and Russia spend billions trying to create. Sarah Mitchell is not alone. 3 separate Pentagon analysts warned this exact scenario would unfold. They predicted that threatening tariffs against NATO members would trigger joint military exercises in the disputed territory. They predicted European leaders would publicly question American reliability. They predicted congressional Republicans would break ranks rather than defend threats against longtime allies. All 3 predictions came true within weeks, and every warning was ignored by an administration that confused aggressive rhetoric with strategic thinking. That is what I call catastrophic policy planning, and it gets worse. And this is where it becomes undeniable. While Trump was withdrawing tariff threats and backpedaling on military force, Mark Carney was delivering what experts are calling the most consequential speech by a Canadian Prime Minister in decades at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Translation: Trump created the perfect vacuum for rivals to fill, and America's closest ally just stepped into it. Carney's speech explicitly called for middle powers to resist coercion by aggressive superpowers. He stressed the end of the rules-based international order and declared that this bargain no longer works. He said, "We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition." He never mentioned the United States by name. He didn't have to. Every delegate in that room knew exactly who he meant. Bob Rae, Canada's former UN ambassador, told CBC something that should terrify every American who understands global power dynamics. He said, "I haven't ever seen a global reaction to a speech like Carney's." Let that sink in. America's neighbour, our closest trading partner, our longest ally, just became the world's moral authority, while our president was stumbling through failed real estate negotiations. Senator Peter Boehm described Carney's address as the most consequential by a Canadian Prime Minister in decades. Think about what that means. This wasn't just diplomatic positioning. This was Canada announcing to the world that the American century is over, and they're ready to lead what comes next. Here's the domino acceleration that should keep every American awake at night. Carney's call for a middle power alliance gives China, Russia, and Iran exactly what they've been trying to achieve for decades: a post-American world order led by America's closest ally. Beijing and Moscow don't need to defeat NATO when NATO's second largest member is publicly questioning American leadership and offering an alternative vision. When Carney said there's a rupture in the US-led global system, here's the translation: America can no longer be trusted to lead. This is diplomatic code for regime change without military action. This is how empires end in the modern world, not with invasion or revolution, but with allies quietly walking away and building something new without you. The World Economic Forum attendees took notice immediately. Trump was in the same building delivering confused remarks about Greenland, while Canada's Prime Minister was reshaping the international order 3 floors below. The contrast could not have been more stark or more damaging to American credibility. And this is where it becomes undeniable. Congress watched this happen in real time. They watched Trump's threats backfire. They watched European allies deploy troops to Greenland in direct response to American coercion. They watched Canada emerge as the leader of a new international coalition designed specifically to contain American influence. What happened next on Capitol Hill makes the Greenland collapse look like a minor diplomatic embarrassment. What happened next on Capitol Hill makes the Greenland collapse look like a minor diplomatic embarrassment. Congressional Republicans just delivered the most devastating public rebuke of their own president in modern American history. Senate Majority Leader John Thune rejected military action outright. He told reporters Tuesday he does not see military action being an option in Greenland. House Speaker Mike Johnson said he did not think it would be appropriate for the United States to use military force to acquire Greenland. Translation: Trump's own party just told the world they won't back his signature foreign policy initiative. But then Republican Senator Tom Tillis went nuclear. He said it's great for Putin, Xi, and other adversaries who want to see NATO divided. It hurts the legacy of President Trump and undercuts all the work he has done to strengthen the NATO alliance over the years. Think about what just happened. When your own party compares your policies to enemy propaganda, that is political death. Tillis didn't just disagree with Trump's approach. He accused Trump of doing Putin's work for him. That is not criticism. That is institutional abandonment. Let me tell you about James Crawford. He's a 15-year congressional staffer who told leadership something that should terrify anyone who understands how Washington works. He said, "I've never seen Republicans this willing to humiliate their own president publicly." He requested anonymity because admitting this reality could end careers in today's political environment. Here's what's happening behind closed doors that nobody is reporting. Democrats are preparing war powers resolutions that would force Republicans to vote on record about blocking Trump's military threats against NATO allies. Republicans like Lisa Murkowski are drafting legislation to prohibit Defense Department funds from being used to attack or occupy territory that belongs to other NATO members without their consent. Congress has the constitutional tools to stop a president completely, and both parties are now preparing to use them against Trump simultaneously. The bipartisan damage control effort tells you everything about Trump's actual support on Capitol Hill. An emergency congressional delegation traveled to Denmark to try to reassure allies that America wouldn't attack them. Only 2 Republicans, Tom Tillis and Lisa Murkowski, were willing to make the trip. Translation: Trump has almost zero congressional support for the defining initiative of his presidency. James Crawford is not alone in his assessment. 5 separate congressional sources confirm that Republicans are privately calling Trump's Greenland obsession career suicide for anyone who defends it. One senior GOP aide told reporters that defending threats against Denmark would be like defending threats against Canada or Mexico. It's politically impossible. And here's the part that should worry Trump the most. Pentagon sources confirm that defense officials are actually relieved that Congress might block funding for any Greenland operation, because they never wanted to plan invasion scenarios against NATO, allies in the first place. When the military doesn't want to follow presidential orders and Congress is preparing to block those orders, that president has lost all institutional support. Representative Don Bacon stated publicly that Congress must reclaim tariff authorities and that most Americans disagree with the president's heavy-handedness. He called threatening NATO members shameful. When House Republicans are using words like shameful to describe their own president's foreign policy, that is complete institutional collapse. This is not about partisan politics. This is about basic constitutional authority and alliance relationships that took 70 years to build. And it gets worse. And it gets worse. The global impact of this constitutional crisis is already reshaping how the world sees American power, and our enemies are taking detailed notes on every weakness they just observed. NATO allies watched America's president threaten them with tariffs, backtrack under pressure, then get publicly rebuked by his own Congress in real time. Tilly Martinson of Greenland captured the permanent damage perfectly when she told reporters, "We can never really trust America again." That is not hyperbole. That is the new reality for American foreign policy. Think about what just happened from Beijing and Moscow's perspective. China and Russia observed every step of this catastrophe. They now know that congressional Republicans will break with Trump when pushed hard enough, They know that Pentagon officials privately oppose aggressive NATO policies. They know that America's closest ally is openly building coalition structures designed to contain American influence. Sarah Mitchell, our Pentagon strategist from earlier, told colleagues something that should terrify every American who understands how intelligence services operate. She said, "We just showed every enemy exactly how to split American leadership. They're taking notes on which pressure points work, which Republicans will break ranks, and how to exploit institutional divisions between Congress and the executive branch." Let that sink in. America's enemies now have a detailed playbook for paralyzing American foreign policy by simply forcing Trump to choose between threatening allies and losing congressional support. The economic reality makes this even worse. The $700 billion price tag Trump promoted to justify threatening NATO allies, that was just the purchase price. Infrastructure development would cost hundreds of billions more, with no returns for 2 decades minimum. One analyst called it exactly what it was. The numbers just don't add up at all. Translation: America damaged 70 years of alliance relationships over a real estate deal that was financially impossible from day one. Democrats have a clear strategy to exploit the Republican divisions Trump just created. They plan to force Republicans to vote on war powers resolutions and make them choose between Trump and constitutional law on the record. Early indicators from Republican senators suggest they will choose the Constitution over defending threats against NATO allies. That is unprecedented in modern American politics. When a president's own party publicly prepares to block his foreign policy initiatives using constitutional tools, that president has lost all institutional legitimacy on the global stage. Meanwhile, Mark Carney was consolidating middle power support for the exact alliance structure designed to contain American influence. While Trump retreated from his promises and congressional Republicans abandoned his strategy, Canada's Prime Minister was building the post-American international order that China and Russia have been dreaming about for decades. The timing could not have been worse for American credibility. Every world leader at Davos watched this play out in real time. They saw American institutional breakdown on full display, while Canada offered a credible alternative to American leadership. This is how empires lose global influence in the 21st century. Not through military defeat or economic collapse, but through allies quietly walking away and building something new without you. This pattern will repeat. Every foreign policy initiative Trump attempts now faces the same dynamic: congressional Republican revolt, allied skepticism, and enemy exploitation of visible weakness. What happened with Greenland wasn't an isolated incident. It's the new template for American foreign policy failure. Think about what our enemies learned from watching this catastrophe unfold. They learned that threatening NATO allies triggers immediate congressional opposition from both parties. They learned that Pentagon officials will privately oppose policies that damage alliance relationships. They learned that America's closest ally is ready to build alternative international structures when American leadership fails. That knowledge is permanent. Beijing and Moscow now have a detailed playbook for paralyzing American foreign policy by simply forcing Trump to choose between aggressive rhetoric and institutional support. Every future crisis will follow this exact pattern until American leadership credibility is completely destroyed. Here's the accountability question I want you to answer in the comments. Should Congress use war powers resolutions to block presidential foreign policy when even the president's own party calls it dangerous to national security? Because this is not theoretical. Democrats are preparing those resolutions right now. Republicans are drafting legislation to block Defense Department funding for attacking NATO allies. This is happening in real time. Because this story is not over. Trump still wants Greenland despite the congressional revolt. Mark Carney is building his middle power alliance with the exact countries America needs as partners. Congress is preparing constitutional tools that could block every foreign policy initiative Trump attempts for the rest of his presidency. I will document every domino that falls from this constitutional crisis, because the implications reach far beyond one real estate obsession in the Arctic. I read every comment because this affects every American who understands how quickly global leadership can collapse when institutions turn against each other. Share this video with everyone who needs to understand what just happened to American credibility on the world stage. I'm Barbara Green, and this is not about politics. This is about the math of power. The numbers don't lie. The alliance relationships are damaged. The congressional opposition is bipartisan and permanent. Subscribe for continued coverage as this constitutional crisis unfolds, because the consequences are just beginning.